Welcome to our channel. Today we will share another infidelity story. Join us as our main character shares her story. Hello, 6 months ago, I experienced something that left me feeling regret and remorse. Those feelings haunt me as I feel ashamed for my actions. My name is Greta. I am a 25-year-old woman who has been married for 9 months. I don't do any jobs. Basically, I'm a housewife with an average life. I love my husband. My husband is the type of a man that many women desire. He is handsome, sensitive, polite, and very kind. A true gentleman. He is well groomed. One can say that he is as groomed as a man can be. He spends a lot of time on grooming and on dressing up. His counter is filled with perfumes, deodorants, and products related to hand care and foot care. We met in my previous job as a salesperson for cosmetic products. We were both sales consultants. I was amazed by his gentle and polite nature. My husband is 6 foot tall, while I'm much shorter. We got married a year after our first encounter. My husband now works on the stock market at the bank. He has an extremely busy work life. He usually arrives home at 10 o'clock in the evening. His earnings are quite good, so I do not need to work. This year, we moved to a nicer neighborhood. Our apartment building consists of 2-story houses. It is a very decent and prestigious place. On the first day of moving to this building, we heard strange noises at night. We heard a woman screaming. She was being beaten by a man. The woman kept telling him to stop. It felt like the house would be demolished. At one point, my husband said, "I wonder if we should call the police." I was scared. We didn't know who they were. While we were contemplating what to do, the sound stopped. But we couldn't sleep all night, wondering if he had killed the woman. In the morning, my husband left for work as usual. I went to the market at around 10 o'clock to buy something. When I walked out of the door, I came across a woman outside of the apartment. She was a blonde, young woman wearing pink tight and a t-shirt with straps. She greeted me. I waved back at her. Then she introduced herself, saying she was Adriana, our neighbor 1 floor above. "I'm sorry, we didn't realize you moved in the evening. I hope we didn't disturb you. The apartment you just moved in had been empty for a long time," she said. "Never mind. We were just scared for you when we heard those voices. We thought something was going on with you," I said. Adriana started blushing. She looked ahead and said, "No, I'm fine, it's fine. We were just joking around with my husband." I thought to myself, what kind of joke is that? It turns out that they almost destroyed their apartment because they were making love. "It's okay, it doesn't matter," I responded. Then Adriana invited me for a coffee in her place in 2 hours. After 2 hours, I knocked on her door. Another woman opened the door and welcomed me very warmly, but the woman was almost naked. I stayed there for almost 3 hours. Adriana was a really good woman. She was 3 years older than me. Her husband was 10 years older than her. Her husband had a shop in auto industry. She was a very cheerful woman. I have to admit, she was very beautiful. I was a little jealous. When I told my husband what had happened the night before, he burst into laughter. "It turns out the situation was quite different from what we had imagined," he said. During night, the violent sounds resumed. Of course, they were not as loud as yesterday. The couple were obviously more careful. Apparently, our walls were thick. We could hear every breath they took. I could hear the man's breathing. I felt aroused and looked at my husband in anticipation of closeness. "I'm tired, please sleep," he said. As days passed, we became friends with Adriana. She was a very easygoing woman. She could easily talk about what was going on between her and her husband, but I never saw her husband as he arrived home late. Once Adriana invited us to dinner at their place. I met her husband that evening. His name was Jonathan. My husband was like a child compared to Jonathan. Jonathan was a very tall and big man. His arms were dark and his veins were visible. I felt admiration mixed with fear for Jonathan. He was also a bit of a rude man. We sat for about 2 hours. I realized that my husband did not like him very much. In my husband's words, Jonathan was a redneck. He was not. But he was not as gentle and well-groomed as my husband, because he did a blue-collar job. After dinner, we excused ourselves and left. My husband did not say anything about Jonathan, we did not talk much, and we went to bed. Of course, the voices started again at the usual time of the night. "What kind of energy do they have?" I said out loud. "Well, come on, honey, let's sleep. I'll get up early in the morning," my husband said. On Sunday, my husband told me he would be arriving home late as he had a corporate dinner that day. Meanwhile, Adriana phoned me to invite me to her place for a coffee. "Your husband is at home. I don't want to disturb him," I said. Adriana insisted that I visited them. "He's watching TV. We can talk in the balcony," she said. I agreed and went to their apartment. Jonathan was lying on the sofa in the living room, watching TV. The man was really big, barely fitting the sofa. He was wearing shorts. His legs as well as his arms were covered in black, thick hair. Adriana and I sat in the balcony, drinking coffee. I was facing the door and could see Jonathan from time to time. He also noticed me. He was watching TV, but from time to time we would make eye contact. It was very strange to see him. He was quite opposite to my husband. I didn't know if he was handsome or average looking. Adriana was talking non-stop. I pretended to listen to Adriana and nodded, but my eyes were always on Jonathan, and he kept looking at me. At one point, he started touching himself and looked at me. I immediately turned my eyes away. After chatting with Adriana for an hour, I left. When I entered my apartment, my heart was pounding with excitement. I couldn't come to my senses for hours. A week later, Adriana went to her hometown for a week as her mother was sick and she had to take care of her. Jonathan came home early that day. I saw him randomly through the window. Suddenly, without understanding how it happened, I ran to the door and opened it. He was just going upstairs. I said, "Hello, Mr. Jonathan. I'm sorry your mother-in-law is sick. I hope she recovers as soon as possible. If you need anything, do not hesitate to tell me," I said. He thanked me and smiled. Then he left. I was trembling. What was I doing? Was I an idiot? I was furious at myself for saying those words to him. I had mixed feelings. I was angry with myself. The following day my husband said he would have another business dinner with his bosses and that he wouldn't make it home earlier than midnight. He told me not to wait for him. I started to wait for Jonathan involuntarily. He came home at around 9 in the evening. I knocked on his door with a pot in my hand. "Good evening, Mr. Jonathan. I brought you some food," I said. "Thank you very much." "Come in," he said. I told him that I would just leave the meal and leave. "But I can't eat alone. Come in," he said and pulled me through the door into his apartment. I felt lost. I didn't understand what was happening. He then closed the door. My heart was pounding. I couldn't do anything. I neither resisted nor made any sounds. A few minutes later, I started making the same voices that I would hear coming from their apartment at nights. I came home at midnight and went to bed right away. I was still shaking. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. After that incident, we started acting like nothing had happened. It didn't happen again. But the feeling of regret has been haunting since the night I made that terrible mistake.